So let's create a custom exception. We start with the class. We give a name to our custom exception. In this case, I'll call it Maziar exception, which has to extend from class exception. We already have a class exception, so we don't write it again. We just use it. That's all. Now, if I want to throw an exception, I simply go and say throw new Maziar exception, error message. Here you go. As simple as that. So if I open my browser, go to this page, I simply, as soon as I throw the exception, I get onCut exception, whatever was the exception class, and with the error message that I posted, right? Let's look at the code one more time. So I need to have a name for my exception. It can be invalid email exception, user not found exception, connection error exception, and so on. Yes? Turn it off? Oh, make it bigger. Okay, for sure. Okay. If I remember what it was. Oh, here it is. Option, font, 18. Here you go. So now that we have thrown this, we simply go try, and I throw this exception, the exception I just created. Now here, I will not just catch the exception. I'll create another catch block, right? And the very first thing I try to catch is my own exception, Maziar exception, right? If Maziar exception is not thrown, any other error, like exception in this case is else. If anything else happen, just let the exception, the second catch, to catch it. So now I have the object. I want to go ahead and do this. I want to print this, right? I'll go echo h1 tag dot $, get what? Get message. So if I go here, simply you see this, right? Now, I want you to tell me, let me see if I can bring this up. I want you to tell me how can I execute the second catch part? What should I do in order to run this catch? I'm here. See, I want to say echo, I am in second catch block. What should I do to run this command? What should change? Throw what? Throw a regular exception, right? If I throw a regular exception, the second catch will catch the exception, not the first one, right? If I go here and just say throw new exception, this is the main exception, the one that I inherit. Now if I go here, refresh the page, I will get the message on the second catch. Does that make sense? Yes? I want you to create a public method and call it print. What it does is it will print the error message that happens. Okay? So I want you to add a property to the exception you just created. Call it print. The only thing it does, it just prints the error message. Is that understood? Yes? Okay, let's start. So I'm going to create a public function, and I'll call it print. It doesn't receive any parameter, but before I go on, let me see if there is any error, because it indicates unexpected t print. Can you tell me what is the problem? Why it doesn't work? Because the print is It's a keyword, right? So I have to change it. Here you go. So I done that. Now, this method can be called by any object of type Mozilla exception, right? Any object that I create from this class can call this print function. Those objects can have different error messages. So I should be able to say, give me the error message for object A, object B, object C, right? How do you refer to the current object? $ this, right? So I would say this get message. Now, it's all up to you. You want to print it or you want to return it, right? In any of those will work. So if I go here, let me just do return. If I go do this, now instead of calling get message, I can simply call what? Print. Let's look at the result. Here you go, right? Let me just change the exception type here so we get the proper one. You see that? Let's look at my code one more time. So I create a public function that allows me to call this function, and anytime I call this function, it simply returns the error message that happens when this exception was thrown. So I simply call this on the object that I have in the catch block, and I call the print method. So let's call the function test, right? You create this function. I want you to throw exception of the custom exception that you have created in this function. So outside the class, you create a function called test, and then simply I want you to do this. Right? If I save this work, you should not see any changes. So what we want to do is, we want to create the database first, right? What is that? The plan is to create a table called log inside the test database. Whenever an exception happens, we catch the exception and we log it to database. Does that make sense? So later on, the administrator can look at the database, see what are the exception happens. Now, in order to do that, let's go ahead and open PHP MyAdmin. Okay. Localhost 800 PHP MyAdmin. Go to test database and create a table called log. We need two fields. Okay. So I just create on test. Since there is no table in there, it gives me two boxes. I'll call it logs. And I have two fields. Are you with me? Yeah. Click on OK. And then we have to specify the name for each of those fields. First one, we call it ID, and we make it auto increment because I want to be able to manage this record later on. I want to be able to modify, delete, update, or any other thing that I want to do. Usually I make this one unsigned as soon as I make it auto increment because I don't really need negative number for the indexes here. And then I'll call it message. Okay? And I will use text because I might have long messages to store, right? I do my ISAM table instead of InnoDB because my ISAM is faster to read, right? So, and then I click on save. Everybody did this? Okay. So the table has been created, called log, is empty at this moment, has two fields, ID and message. ID is integer and message is text, right? Okay. Let's go ahead to our code. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to create a function called log. So I simply go here, create the function log. Okay. So what we learned what object do you use to connect to a database? PDO, right? So I'll create a connection database and using new PDO. What are the parameters that I need for PDO? First I have to say which driver to load. What driver do I have to load? What database? MySQL, right? And then what is the next one? What is the next parameter I need? What is the next parameter I need to connect to database? Host first, right? I need the host. What is the host in this machine? Local host. And then I need the DB name, which in this case is test. The username on this machine is root, and there is no password for it, right? So I'll create my object, a connection to the database, database test. Now I want to write my SQL statement. Okay? So I'll create a variable and start writing my SQL statement. Let's see if you can write this SQL statement. I want to insert a record in table logs that I will just create, storing the error message I get from this exception. So after putting the insert into log message, I simply put the get message in there. I'll put the curly bracket to execute this inside this string. So let's go ahead and just do echo query. I want to see what we get, right? Right here, what I have this, I go ahead and call the other exception, other function as well. So I go ex log, because that is where it makes sense. When you catch the exception, that is when you want to log the error into the database, right? So I have it inside the catch. Now if I go and run this, it should actually print the SQL statement to the string, to the screen. Do I pass? What do I do? Let me see. Log throws what? Yeah, let's go through test, because test throws the proper exception. Okay, I come back over here, run this. Error message. Do you see that? Insert into log message value. So my query is okay. Now, most of the time, what I do is myself, when I run this, let me just bring it up one more time. I just test this on PHPMyAdmin to make sure it works before I go further. So I just do this. It means the query has no error. And if I go to the table, I have one record in there. Do you see that? Right? Now, let's delete this and go ahead and run our program. So now that I know everything is okay, I simply go and call my connection, because I already created a connection to database, right? The variable, and I call the execute function, not query. Query is just for selecting. Execute is for insert, update, or delete, right? So I'll go ahead, call this, and I pass my query. Okay, let's go ahead, run this. Everything should be okay. Now I go browse. Here is a record. Do you see that? It's number 2. If I run it one more time, then I will have another record in there, number 3. So what I did is I simply created a method that can log my exception into database so I can look at it later, right? Any question?